The goals for this video are the resources and tools that I would use to understand the PMBOK, to clarify what are the differences between the 6th and 7th edition, and I'll actually walk you through the 7th edition on the main key areas and provide you examples to help you better understand and remember the principles. If that sounds helpful to you, continue watching. So the PMBOK is basically a really detailed book that has a lot of different definitions and best practices from experienced project managers in ways that they've found success on their projects. So another way of thinking about this is, if there's a dictionary that's strictly for project management things, that would be the PMBOK. With that being said, there are over 7 different versions, with the latest one being the 7th edition that was published in 2021. So the main differences are, in the 7th edition, it's more focused on overarching themes and performance-based principles. And personally, I thought the 6th edition was more detailed in the actual project management workflows. So with that being said, which version should you study? My advice is honestly use both. They're both really great resources. The core principles and information is still pretty similar between the two versions. They're just presented in a different format, and the structure is a little bit different as well. I will note that the 7th edition has more agile-based principles, so make sure that you study those agile techniques if you're only using the 6th edition. So here's how I would approach studying for the PMP exam. I have to give a huge shout out to Ricardo Vargas for creating great visual guides for internalizing the 6th and 7th edition. So on my screen now, I have pulled up Ricardo's latest 7th edition guide, and I'm actually going to walk you through what information you need to know on this guide and provide you with some real-life examples to help you better internalize it. So again, with the 7th edition, the focus is on principles rather than knowledge areas, but honestly, a lot of the core information is pretty much the exact same between the 6th and 7th edition. So we'll start with the upper left-hand corner on principles. So one of the core principles as a project manager is to have good stewardship. So what is stewardship? Ricardo defines this as feeling responsible and committed to delivering value throughout the project. So let me give you an example. I want you to think about something that you really care about, whether that's your family, a family member, a spouse, a child, a best friend. When you really care about that specific person or thing, you probably go out of your way to make sure that they're taken care of. You probably put a lot of effort into making sure that your relationship is good. You're probably deeply invested in that person or thing, and you want to make sure that they're successful. So take those same feelings and passion for that one thing that you care about, that one person you care about, and apply that to a project. Stewardship is really being committed to the success of a project and just being passionate about making sure that it's set up in the best way that it can be. Next, we have team. So creating a collaborative project team environment. So how do you build a team, and how do you make sure your team members are happy? A huge part of this is creating a collaborative environment and working together towards the same goals. If you're in a manager position, that means empowering your team members and rewarding them for all the great efforts that they've been contributing, so tying in their results to their career goals. So that really goes down to understanding your team members. How do your team members like to work? What are their strengths and weaknesses? Focus on their strengths, highlight them, and help them build on their weaknesses. Let's go down to stakeholders now. Stakeholder engagement is one of the most important parts of a project. Your client stakeholders are the ones that are paying for the project. If they're not engaged, the project could be a complete disaster because they could be expecting something that could be completely different from what you're delivering to them. So how do you engage stakeholders effectively? If we go way back in time to when you were just a child and you wanted something from mom or dad, what did you do? What were the different methods that you used? You may have cried, you may have pouted, you may have shouted, you may have yelled. If you were a more well-behaved child, you may have complied, and you may have done the things that your parents asked you to do in order for you to get that small reward. Now, for stakeholder engagement, I don't recommend you crying, shouting to any of your clients. Definitely don't do that. But the same principles apply. Figuring out the best way to cater to your client and to your stakeholders, and the best way to get their attention and for them to communicate back to you. So that goes back to understanding what their communication preferences are, and you can do this by first trying to show as much value as you can to the client, so that when they see your name and they see, oh wait, Max is sending me an email and it's about these important project updates. He's not asking me to do anything, but it's really helpful to know, and this makes my life easier. Making your stakeholders' lives easier, that is the best way for them to be engaged. This goes directly hand in hand with the next principle, which is focusing on value. So this is arguably one of the most important principles because if you think about it, there would be no project if there was no value, right? With any project, there's someone who's likely paying some type of amount, and with that cost, there's an expectation that something will be created or something will be different that's worth the cost. So here's an example that helps paint the picture. Let's say we have this small mom and pop shop. It's a small little bakery. They only do cash transactions. So they don't process credit cards, they don't do Venmo, they don't do any of that stuff. They don't take Bitcoin, any of that stuff. They just do cash. The mom and pop shop, they're not too tech savvy, but they finally realize that they may want to purchase some credit card machines in order for their customers to be able to use cards at their bakery. So this is going to be a new cost to this bakery. Why would they get this service? Well, maybe it could be that a lot of their customers have complained and they've mentioned that they don't have enough cash on them at all times. They want to be able to have the flexibility to use a credit card. It could be that there's an untapped marketplace where there's a lot of other customers who only use cards and they haven't stopped by because they don't have cash. Whatever the case is, there is value behind why this mom and pop shop is taking on this new project, taking on this new service and cost. If you focus on the value for your project, I guarantee you it will make your life and your clients' lives a lot easier because you'll understand the big picture and you can work backwards on the steps needed in order to get there. Okay, systems thinking. So this one is recognizing, evaluating, and responding to system interactions. Really what this means is a project is affected by a lot of different variables. You can do your best to control everything that's within your power, but oftentimes things happen, life happens. Let's say that mom and pop shop is working with a credit card vendor. If the vendor gets sick, the credit card machine can't be delivered on time. So it's really important to be as adaptable and agile, using a buzzword here, which really just means being flexible and being able to accommodate to changes. All of that to say, the final principle on the left-hand side is leadership. So demonstrating good leadership ability. As the project management lead, the pressure's on you to set the stage and to make sure that work is getting done. This goes back to really understanding your team. So understanding what their communication preferences are, what their strengths and weaknesses are, where you can help them perform the best that they can. There are many different leadership styles out there, and there's no one right answer. It really depends on who you're working with. One very common one you'll see project managers use is called servant leadership. And that really means leading by doing first. So if there's a project, that means the project manager will use their servant leadership to take the first steps, to take the initiative in trying to solve the problem. And by taking action, it shows their team members that they're willing to get their hands dirty, that they're invested, and that they truly care about the project being a success. Think about what leadership style works best for your team. Okay, let's go to the right-hand side now. Tailoring. So tailoring based on context. Ricardo defines this as, your approach cannot be a one-size-fits-all. It's really important that you tailor your approach, whether that's your project management framework, your leadership style. Honestly, tailoring can be applied to literally everything that you do as a project manager. The key calls here are, even if you internalize everything in the project management body of knowledge, even if you read everything, all of that is theoretical and textbook knowledge, right? So it's good that you know these things, but when it comes to application, where an experienced project manager comes into play is really understanding what types of principles and techniques you use based in certain circumstances. If you don't listen to anything else I say in this video, please pay attention to this one piece. It doesn't really matter how much you read. What matters more is understanding the logical thought process, project management frameworks and tools. These are all very logical principles. So theoretically, if you're a very logical person and you understand the big picture, a lot of this content, it should just make sense. It should just click. Next, we have quality. So quality is one of the most important principles that every project manager should keep in mind. Let's say you're supposed to build a house in 3 months, and you and your team built it in 1 month. You guys start celebrating. 2 months early, that's fantastic. Cost-wise, you guys were below budget. You guys saved your clients hundreds of thousands of dollars. Amazing. But for the quality, let's say the roof was leaking, the foundation wasn't set correctly, and the plumbing was completely wrong. So when it came time for the client to actually use their home, they were very upset. Would you still consider this project a success? So quality is really important. Getting feedback from your clients, taking that feedback, adjusting as needed, and making sure you're testing whatever it is that you and your teams are building so that when it comes time to being used, it meets the expectation of your client. Okay, so the next 4 are complexity, risk, adaptability, and change. Honestly, I feel like a lot of these are kind of buzzwords, but they really all go hand in hand. So when it comes to complexity, the earlier on you can understand all the intricacies that your project may run into, the better off you'll be. It's as simple as that. I always like to dedicate a lot of time up front into really understanding and making sure that I know as much as I possibly can about the project. It becomes less ambiguous. When you run into issues, likely those are things that you've already accounted for, and it just makes life so much easier. The same thing goes for risks. Risks are a part of every single project. Taking the time up front during every project to really understand the details will set you and your teams up for better success. As always, it's important to be adaptable and to be resilient. No matter how much control and effort you put into trying to control all the variables, realistically, things always hit the fan still. This goes back to that system thinking principle where your project is only a small piece of a lot of other things that are going around behind the scenes. If you keep that in mind and you know that you can be flexible and you have different options and you have different plans for when things change, you'll be in a lot better position. Okay, so going further down, Ricardo has these performance domains, and these are really like related activities that are really important to deliver what the client wants. So let's quickly go over these 8 performance domains. Stakeholder and team, we've already covered as principles, and they're pretty much the same thing. Development approach and life cycle. There are a couple of different options, and this goes back to tailoring your project management approach to what makes the most sense. If your project is one that is really repetitive, you've done it a million times, it's probably pretty predictive. There aren't that many things that change. It's probably really predictive. I would advise you to use a waterfall approach. If you're building out software, things are changing, you're building out new features for a new client, you'll probably want to use an iterative approach, which basically means you're building for a short period of time, you're testing it, you're getting feedback from the client, and then you continue that process until the end product is something the customer will accept. And then somewhere between, there's a hybrid approach, and that's where a lot of projects fall. Think about which one makes the most sense for your project, and use that framework as a good foundation to build off of. Planning is very important for every project. I think the main thing here is start big picture, think about what the result or the end value is for the client, and then work backwards from there. So for instance, if your project is to build a house, start thinking about what kind of house the client wants. Then take a step back. In order to build a house, what do you need? You need certain types of tools. You need certain types of labor. You probably need a lot of supplies. Work backwards and then try to get as granular as you can. And for every task that needs to get done, try to figure out where it makes the most sense to place it in a timeline. Things could sometimes even be done at the exact same time. Really important to think about. Once a project is started, the project work is very, very important. So the project manager's job is to make sure things like the timeline, the cost, the work itself, all that's being tracked, all that's being done. And throughout that process, there's a lot of different things that happen behind the scenes to make sure your project is a success. As I mentioned earlier, a lot of the core content is the exact same between the 6th and 7th edition, and Ricardo even calls out it has some of the same elements from the 6th edition. So once your project is complete, how are you going to show your client that everything's done? Delivery is one of the most important phases of a project. It's where you show your client, these were the requirements, these are the results, and this is how everything looks at the very end. And last but not least, measurement and uncertainty. I think these two are really just a good call out that a project manager should be tracking everything if possible. So whether that's project progress, having some sort of way of showing and holding teams accountable to that, and then if there's any uncertainty in terms of risk or issues, making sure you have a method for keeping track of those so that those get resolved. Okay, so overall, that's a pretty high-level review. I would highly recommend you to first review the 7th edition guide, and then afterwards, take a look at the 6th edition guide that Ricardo made, as that one has a lot more of the technical intricacies and details that are really helpful to learn. Hope you guys found this video helpful. If you'd like me to cover the 6th edition process mapping workflow, happy to make another video on that. Please comment below, and we'll catch you on the next video.